نحمده ونصلي على رسول الكريم أما بعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakum khairan for staying behind, keeping me company at least. So, as I expected, because it's an area which we're so unfamiliar with, is finance. We don't even have the questions that we need the answers to, because unfortunately, Islam has become, or we have made Islam rather, as something which is solely for our private ritual acts of worship. And Islam is holistic. Islam, and that's why as a philosophy, people across the globe or philosophies across the globe have issues with Islam because of its holistic nature. It doesn't just deal with our private worship. Many people would like it outside of the Islamic circle for it to just deal with private worship and say, that's it. Islam, in the masjid, Islam when you're praying, when you're fasting. But as soon as you're doing other things, then leave your Islam there. Well, Islam, as I said, is holistic. It deals with all aspects of our life, of our faith. And therefore also, money is one of the things which becomes a primary driving force for everything we do. We study at uni or whatever for the very reason to think, if I qualify, I get a better job. What do you need a better job for? Essence, bottom line is the money. You want to get paid more. And that becomes our driving force. And even when we're at work, we want to push to the next position, the next position, the next position. Why? Yes, okay, I get a slightly bigger desk or maybe a bigger office, but the bottom line is I get paid more. And as I was chatting with Maulana on the way here, we've now got, even within houses, the wife is now also working and she's got as much of a career ambition, even more so than the husband has. And so why? Because to get more money. And that becomes our driving force. And obviously, our homes suffer as a consequence because, parents are instrumental in tarbiyah of children. And when we kind of outsource the tarbiyah of our children, then it's never going to be the same. I've sat with elders, and some of you might say, well, aren't you an elder? There's people older than me. I know that sounds crazy that there's actually people older than me, but there are people older than me as well. And when I sat with them and those who migrated here, and I said, of course, you've seen the benefit of migrating from so-called Darul Islam, and you've come here, where you've come from communities which are primarily been Muslim-centric communities, and you've come here. Was it overall worth it? And they won't give you a confident answer that yes, absolutely it was worth it, because as a community, as a people, we have suffered as well. Whether it's children not following the deen as we expected them to follow. Where now, when I sit with younger people or with parents, their concerns are so much now with the spread of sort of social media, with also the questions of identity, which children have to face that we never faced. When I was at school, I knew what I was. I wasn't confused as to what I was. But if I was in school now, it's easy to be confused because you're questioned and you're challenged and your opinion is given so much value. So, we when we've made Islam just solely for our ibadat, and not for our other aspects of our life, then we will suffer. So I expected there to be I can hear the shriek of the silence in the number of questions coming forward, because we don't even know what the issue is that we need to ask about. One only becomes aware. You only ask the question when you have ilm. Right? I know that might sound strange, right, and counterintuitive that women, if I had the ilm, why would I ask you the question? Because it's the ilm that makes you ask the question, but it's only nisful ilm. Because when you have half of knowledge, you ask a question, and then the answer makes it full. But when we don't have that initial ilm, then we don't even know what we should be asking for. What should I ask that person? And this is the danger, because we're all earning money. Right? I won't crack that joke again, but I believe most of us are earning money. Yeah, so we're all earning money. We're all buying houses. We're all investing. We've probably all got pensions. We've got maybe ISAs, our children maybe have gone to uni or going to uni, we're dealing with money every single day. We've got bank accounts, probably got a dozen of bank accounts. We're transacting regularly. We're using, pay now, buy now, pay later. We might be doing some drop shipping. We were all engaged in things, but we've never stopped once to say, Yani, is this halal that I'm doing? And halal has been unfortunately designated specifically to, where am I getting my chicken from, or where am I getting my, burger from? And halal is not just a food label. Halal means from a legal perspective, meaning it is legitimate. Yeah, that act is permissible. And haram means that act is impermissible. It does not mean that you can eat that food, but you can't eat that food. But because we've kind of compartmentalized our faith, and we've not treated it in this holistic manner. So really, and this is one of the reasons why I took up the offer, as well, and some of the work that we're doing with Andurun as well, is to raise awareness. Because I think primarily the focus has to be is to raise awareness first. Realize what the issues are, and then inshallah, maybe the generation after answers those questions. The ulama that are going to come after, they may deal with those. But as a community, we've got to become more aware. And, for us, when it comes to, we say khinzir is haram. Okay. And you find now that the sort of food technologists and the food experts will say that most diseases are transferred through the consumption of pork. And it's dangerous. It's the worst type of meat that you could eat, in terms of what it does to your body. So Islam, alhamdulillah, yes, it has a message for us as Muslims, but there's also a broader message. And we've seen, when the financial bubble burst in 2008 or something like that, when there was all this kind of double, triple, quadruple, financing on one single asset. And then when that one asset went, that's it. The whole financial system collapsed, and the world was saying, oh, we need a solution. We need a solution. Islam has always had that solution. It's just that us, we're a little bit shy or a little bit embarrassed, to share those solutions. That Islam has had those solutions, both for finance and for other things. So I think really it's an awareness on that point. Sorry, I didn't even ask a question. What was that question? There was a question there. No wonder they don't ask questions. What was it?
On speculative.
Yeah, so speculative. Now, so speculative, especially cryptocurrency, is that there has to be, whenever we're trading, there has to be an asset there. Okay, and you have to know that there's an asset there. That's why when I mentioned, say, drop shipping is considered as impermissible because you're selling something which you don't possess. And you can't sell something which you don't possess. Right? And you can't structure it as a salam. If you structure it as a salam, then you can do it, but that's, we'll talk about that another time. So basically, you can't sell something that you don't possess. Speculation is when you're buying into something that the description is not clear. You don't really know what it is. It's greed which is making the buttons click, because as soon as you hear cryptocurrency, you're connecting Bitcoin. You've seen how Bitcoin has gone through but then you have to ask yourself the question, is that what is determining the value of Bitcoin? Okay. You can see the prices of, rice go up or the price of rice go down. And you can understand why the price of rice is going up, supply demand. Maybe it's the Strait of Hormuz, which controls everything on this planet. Maybe it's that, maybe it's something else. So you can see that. But with cryptocurrency, obviously the fact is that it's the way, the word crypto means hidden. Yeah. Secret. Yeah. It's not clear. It's not decipherable. So it's in the name. And then obviously it has the word currency, but currency really has to be something in which a state supports it. Now, people will say, yes, but back in the day, gold and silver wasn't necessarily state supported and it could be used anywhere. That's a fair point. But you find that, there's always somebody doing something with this. And most of the time, this is where unfortunately we find, people are tricking with the people. So one of the famous cryptocurrencies was OneCoin. And that was even pushed within our own communities that invest into OneCoin. And I've forgotten the lady's name in Bulgaria, some Bulgarian name she had, I think it finished on at the end. And it was a fraud. It was a scam. Okay, it was a scam. Muslims were investing into OneCoin. I had one sister who invested £70,000 into OneCoin. She was crying because it was her own relatives who got her to invest into it. So we're all cousins or whatever, that you're going to make money, you're going to become rich. This is the next Bitcoin. But when they said, what is it? Where is it? What am I buying? It's not tangible. That's why the Sharia is always pushed towards tangible, something you can kind of hold, something you can grip, something you can see, something you can determine. And when it's not, now I appreciate the world has changed, because then they would argue, okay, what about trademarks? Trademarks are not tangible. Okay, what about, when you register, if you have like a nice business here that's making lots of money, and you want to trademark your business name because you think, okay, there's other shops that are opening now that are using my name, and and I want to trademark it. So that's not tangible. So there is a scope for that. Things like patents. When you invent something new, you've invented something, you want to make the money out of that invention, but you want to protect it. So that's sound. But there's these type of speculative natures where we have to be very careful of. And therefore that kind of hopefully answers that.
Machine cover, then is the same for boiler cover and home insurance. Can you?
So when it comes to, say, boiler cover, or, the household items cover, and then obviously we'll talk about insurance. So the concept of cover, Shar'an, is permissible. The argument that's given is that, is this not accepting the qadr of Allah? Because at the end of the day, the qadr of Allah is, qadr Allah ma qadra, whatever he decrees is going to happen. So if I, take out some cover against my washing machine, am I not accepting the decree of Allah? So we know that that's not valid, because there is a concept, and it usually comes from the view of this takaful, where we can come together. I don't know if there's a concept of committees or committee. You have to say it with an Asian accent, don't you? In Batley Dewsbury. I didn't know if that was the case, because actually you just breathe, mashallah, and you don't eat and you don't drink, so you might not need money. But it's the word committee is used. And what people do, so for example, like all those brothers here said, look, in a case somebody's, has the roof collapses, or something goes wrong with their car or something. So why don't we, put in £1,000, all of us here, and whatever there's, 30, 40 of us, we've got 40 grand now, right? And whenever some halat comes on our brother, then out of that 40 grand, we'll spend and fix his car, or we'll fix his roof. Can we do that? Yes, of course we can do that. Shar'an, there's not impermissible to do that. However, this is where the however comes in, that most cover for household items is based on riba. That's the problem. So for example, what you would do is you would make monthly payments of, say, £20, £30 a month. So over the year, you've paid £360. Is my mathematician still here? You're still here. When I need you, I'll call on you. So then you've paid £360, and your washing machine goes kaput, and you need to replace it, and it's £1,500. So you've made payments of £360, and you've withdrawn £1,500. So that is ribu, isn't it? You've made a benefit out of it. So then people say, what about car insurance? Don't we do the same with car insurance? Car insurance is because you will not be legally allowed to drive your car on their roads unless you have car insurance. So the government says, we're not going to let you drive on our roads. So you can have your car, drive it around in your back garden all day long, no problem. But as soon as you come onto our road, we want you to be insured, because what's going to happen is you're going to hit into somebody and then you're going to run off. And then that poor person's not going to claim. So out of necessity, we take car insurance. What I always say to people is, whichever company you've taken car insurance with, if you make a claim from them, then stay with them until you've paid back the claim that you've made. So for instance, if you take, say, £500 or £1,000 a year is your car insurance, and year 2, you've paid £2,000 so far, because £1,000 you're paying every year, and you make a claim on your car's worth £5,000, they pay out £5 grand. Now you've paid £2 grand, but you've collected £5 grand. So then stay with them another 3 years. You've paid another £3 grand, £5 grand for £5 grand. At least your lend-then is clean with respect to that. So therefore, you can have a insurance, but it has to be financially structured, Shari valid. If it's not, then we cannot deal with gharar. We cannot, because it's like gambling, isn't it? It's like saying, you know what, if I pay £50 a month and I make a claim, people even sort of structure the claim, don't they? If I pay £50, well, just before the, insurance is finishing or something, they think, oh, I need to make a claim on, kick the washing machine. Oh, look, it's making a noise. So we claim. So we have to be careful with structuring in that way.
How can one get a loan, financial support for business? English banks allow you to click on a few buttons online and you can get 10,000, 20,000 plus, etc. Seems like Islamic banks are not easily accessible.
That's a fair point. I don't know if you heard that, but they're basically talking about kind of bridging loans or investment. Whenever you've got a business, then you've got two options. One is you take a loan with no benefit. The other option is you give up equity. So if I own a business which I value to be £1 million, but I need an input of money, then I can say, look, brother, I'm going to give you 10% of the business. For 10% of the business, you need to put 100 grand in. So he puts 100 grand in, I get liquidity, I can now do something with that. There are bridging mechanisms that some companies are now trying to offer. Okay, so bridging mechanism or monetization as it's called. In some cases, they have to do a little bit, as I call it, fiqhnastics, which is gymnastics with fiqh. So it becomes fiqhnastics. You'll hear I come up with words myself. So they have to do a bit of fiqhnastics, meaning, grab the ear from here instead of grabbing it from here, because they're working within the system. And when you're working within the system, it sometimes proves to be too difficult to release those kind of monetization. So there are methods. That's called tawarruk, which is not something that I favor, not something that I normally give fatwa on, that you can use tawarruk. However, certain ulama have, out of necessity, that in order to monetize. So but they're very small organizations that are doing that. There are groups of people now that are working on APPGs, all party parliamentary groups, trying to work with the government to saying, look, you're saying, I think it was David Cameron back in 2007 or something, that he said, London is going to be the center of Islamic finance outside of the Muslim world. And he really pitched it like that. He said, this is it. This is where we're going to make the money. Obviously, I'm probably expecting lots of money to come from the GCC. And that was the aim. And that's why things like student loans was going to be explored. That's why also, looking at having these bridging facilities. So there are organizations that do it, but very small at the moment. So again, supply demand, as I mentioned in the lecture, that whenever Muslim organizations do these things, the Muslim community does not come forward. It does not support them. And then as a result, they do collapse and then they're closed. Because imagine if you did it, you put, £500,000, £2 million into it, and then no one comes to you. You're going to be fuming, when I've just spent 2 million setting up this business to have bridging mechanisms and no one has attended. Wa alaikum salam.
I had some of the talk earlier. So I've got 3 questions.
Ooh.
But it's
They're all connected.
Yeah, I thought I'll keep it busy.
Yeah.
I suppose, thinking from a young person's perspective, not that I'm young anymore, but generally I'm there. So I think you briefly touched on it earlier in terms of buying a house. The conventional model, you stuck for 25, 30 years, you probably paid twice as much. In terms of a mortgage through Islamic setup, obviously there's 2 aspects, the ownership element and the element of rent that you pay alongside. So it'd be great, I think, because particularly now young people think they're more ethical, private, more values based. So I think for them to understand would be particularly important, because those are the young people who need to buy a house. So that was from a young person and purchasing a house. I suppose for people who are a bit more older, they're perhaps thinking more from the perspective of an investment property. Conventionally, you buy an investment property, you pay a higher initial lump sum, and then you pay higher rates. So it'd be interesting if you could just touch on those people who might be considering an investment purchase, how that would work for them under the concept of full Islamic backing. I suppose the third is those people who might be risk averse. They like to have money in their backing because they might not necessarily want to invest. How for them, in having their money Islamic back, does it provide the necessary financial guarantees like it does with HSBC to the value rated by shares? And similarly, where in a conventional vacuum, depending on what the interest rate is at that moment in time, not that we touch you, but you just accumulate in an account and then you give it to charity or whatever. Where does such an equivalent rate exist in an Islamic bank, and whether that rate or whatever it derives in terms of what your investment is, whether that's an acceptable form of money that you can then utilize. So sorry for the long...
Yeah. I'll go in reverse order because I remember them. But if I forget, I've got my brother here will remind me. So in terms of, you want liquidity. So you want to keep cash. You don't want to tie into a long-term investment. So you want to put it in a bank or something where your money can be saved. Generally speaking, when you're talking about conventional banking, then it will always be a riba. What they're saying to you is that, thank you for your money. You're actually loaning them, even though they may not say that you're loaning it to them. They take your money, they loan it out to businesses, loan it out to the consumer. The consumer buys a property, they charge them more interest. So they might charge them, 8%, 6%, 7%, whatever. They'll give you 1-2% out of that. as an income, and they'll keep 6-7% themselves, obviously, because they'll believe they're taking the bigger risk. So they'll think they'll be party to that more, and therefore it's safe. And that's why, unfortunately, the riba system exists. It exists because it feels safer. It is safer. The commoditization of money there was always good intentions behind it. It wasn't though, this kind of, dark shadow behind it. There was, how do me as a rich person stay rich? And that's really what the basis of it was. If a person said, well, no, I want to avoid this. I'm going to put this in an environment where it's sound Islamically, then that becomes an investment. Okay. Because it's no longer a loan. So what would happen is the bank would take that money and it would invest that money. Okay, so it wouldn't be that they would just loan it out and get returns on the loan and share that with you. They would invest that. Now, they would invest it. Usually they would be obviously good risk managers. So they will make sure that, some is in gold or silver or real estate or something, the usual saying that, safe as houses, invest in that. And then obviously there'll be certain which will be slightly higher risk. What they would have is years of experience, which had led them to feel that they would get, say, 6, 7, 8, 9% returns. Usually when you invest, you get more returns than obviously from a riba perspective. So they would hope to get 8, 9, 10% returns. They would then say to you that, okay, we're going to give you 4.5%. So usually the banks that are doing these type of investment, you get greater returns than if you put it in with a riba. They will say, we'll aim to give you 5%. So this will not be a promise because they cannot promise you. They will say, we aim to, based on our track record, to give you 5%. They know they'll get 9%. They'll keep 4 or 5% themselves because at the end of the day, they need to have some form of income, and they will give you 5%. The issue is what if it goes absolutely belly up? Now, the chances of it are small, but obviously that exists. If it does go belly up, then from a Sharia perspective, you lose that money, right? From a Sharia perspective, right? However, we've become risk averse because of the world that we live in. So that's when the FSCS will step in and they will say, right, I think it's now gone up to 120,000. They will say, right, okay, we're going to cover 120,000 loss for you. If obviously there's a bank that's done something or whatever, somebody's done something which is irregular and that shouldn't have happened, then they will do that. However, from a Sharia perspective, that becomes impermissible. Why? Because you didn't take any risk. You have to take risk. See, what happens is in business is we take Allah out of the equation. If I put my money in my bank account, am I going to sit on the musalla and say, Ya Allah, protect my money. Ya Allah, make sure my money, is successful. I'm thinking, HSBC is doing it. Why do I need to, make dua to Allah? God forbid. But, the mindset becomes like that. But if I've invested in something, I want that investment now to grow. So I'm going to turn to Allah and say, Ya Allah, make it. So what happens is all this, even the financial system, it removes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the equation. And our bonds breaks with Allah. Because we now trust the mechanics of the financial system. And rather than the belief in Allah, that Allah will, and yes, Allah will sometimes deliver and sometimes He won't. But that's our belief in Him. That's, we expect the good from Him and we accept the bad from Him. That's because we are His slaves and His servants. And Him, by giving us good and giving us bad, is to nurture us, to become us spiritually stronger. Like when we're nurturing our children, we don't always give them what they want because we know sometimes by not giving them what they want is a better nurture for them. So in the same way, we are like spiritual children, aren't we? And that way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is nurturing in that way. The second point I think you mentioned was about investing in property. Was that right? Yeah.
Somebody who's older wants to invest them.
Yeah. So what usually works with that is I'm surprised that we're not as individualistic as we should be really. 5, 6 people can come together. So let's just say a property is worth 200,000, 300,000, say, and 6 people come together. They put in lump sums of 50,000 each. So when they put 50,000 each, they're now partners in this property. They don't even need, they can maybe have Sharia oversight or Sharia governance, but really it's pretty straightforward, as long as they've checked it with somebody. Now they have a choice. Either they can just wait for the price to appreciate and then sell it in 5 or 6 years' time, or, buy the property for 300,000, but then decide to put another 100,000 in it and add an extra toilet or whatever and sell it on. Or what they might do is put it on the rental market. And now they're gaining from the rent. So what happens is the Muslim community then becomes more engaging with society because now it requires somebody to employ somebody to work in that property to fix it up. So he's got some employment, which means he can now feed his family. And he's earning halal. And also then what it does is that when that property sells, and obviously if they use it for tenants, and the tenants have benefit. And then when they sell it, they've got the income, they're now giving zakat on that. So the system is very different. It is risk, but it's risking who? You're risking in Allah. You know, He's the Razik. He's the one that's it's not that due to that storm that you lost the property. It was Allah was going to take that property from you, come what may. It might have been a storm, it might have been a fire, it might have been just it disappeared in thin air. And your connection with Allah grows stronger. So through your finances, you start to do ibadah, not just in the masjid. And the first one was about young people buying a house. Yeah. So the sorry? Yeah. So the methodology, which we explained earlier in the lecture as well, is one is it's just a loan. And because it's just a loan, there's no risk really for the banks. That's why we, invest our money into banks by giving them our money. They use them, to give out loans. Once they're giving out loans, they want to make it, now most banks are privately held. They're shareholders. So the shareholders want returns. But at the end of the day, what is a bank selling? They're not selling apples. They're not selling, bananas. What they're selling money. Yeah, they're selling debt, and there's poor people whose houses are getting taken off them because they can't afford it. But the shareholder doesn't care less as long as his, dividends are good at the end of the month, and you become party to that. Where some poor person has been forced now, he's lost his job or amputated and he can't work and is now being said, sorry mate, your house is going, your kids can go, whatever, we couldn't care less, heartless, whatever. And we become party to that system. And as Muslims, we have a, high standard to live up to. And the alternative is obviously as the method we explained, which is the house is bought. You give as much money as you can afford to give as a deposit. So you take that percentage as yours. The rest, obviously, you can't afford it. So the capitalist will say, fine, I will fund that for you and we'll buy the house together. You've got the house that you want. I'm doing this as an investment because I'm expecting you to be paying rent for 25 years. You paying rent for 25 years means I'm making X thousands of pounds. And I'll sell you the property that was the value of the property at the time you made the purchase, not when it's 25 years later. So what it does do, like you said there, it makes it a kind of more ethical approach to take.
First, and then we'll have
just two follow-up questions on what we're asked. One is if you've got money in conventional accounts, see if we
most people will see what the house and to see God.
Yes.
Would you recommend doing it more often? And to if you move it all into Islamic banks, and then if you don't mind, would you recommend any Islamic bank for you?
Yeah. So this hal that's given by the ulama, that interest should just be given away. We have to understand that the actual transaction is haram. So the transaction is haram. So the transaction we make with the bank is actually a haram transaction. It's only then when the ulama are giving us a solution that, okay, I've done this transaction now. But for us to intentionally carry on the same transaction is obviously problematic. Once we know something is haram, we can't say, oh, I didn't know. We can only say, I didn't know once, can't we? Once we know, now we can't do it. Something, you're praying salah wrong, and Maulana Sahib comes up and says, brother, your feet are rising in your sajda is not getting done. You can't say, oh, astaghfirullah, jazakumullah khair, Maulana Sahib, I won't do it again. If you keep doing it every time and say, I'll just say astaghfirullah after I've prayed my salah, someone's going to say, you're right in your red, lad, put your feet down. So in the same way here, when we're told this transaction is haram, to do a transaction where I give you £10, you give me £11 back, that's transaction is haram. But I say, yeah, but I'll give the £1 away. Yes, but we're saying the transaction is haram. So that's the first point. It can be as regular as a person wishes. He can leave notes behind if he's, considering that if I do pass away, because that's his only fear, is that when he meets Allah, that he's not done it. So he can't leave notes that if there's any interest that I've got on my accounts, make sure that's given away, beforehand. So at least, on Yawm al-Qiyamah, he's got relatively ease. That's that. What was the second part? Yeah, there are some that I know operate. I don't necessarily recommend because I don't sit on their Sharia supervisory boards. But there is something if you go to Andarun Finance website, we've got some on there. I'm not necessarily, you'll see the disclaimer because I'm making a disclaimer. I don't sit on their supervisory Sharia boards to know exactly what their policies are, exactly what I don't audit them, so I can't speak of that. But from Zahiri Torpar and also looking at the way they're claiming, then they look fine. So if you go to Andarun Finance, if you can share the link to the Satis, then you'll see that we've got a lot of information on there, mashallah. The ulama that work on that spend a lot of time, a lot of money, mashallah, to educate people.
Explain more about offset mortgage.
Offset? Mortgage. Okay. So in the sense of which one are you speaking about specifically?
For example, if I have some money in my bank,
Yes.
then take a mortgage and then I don't have to pay interest on the same amount.
Yes. So, but the issue that comes is the transaction that you're entering into, you see. So just as I was explaining to the brother here, is that you're entering into a usurious transaction, that you're borrowing a loan, and if you're going to pay any interest back, this is the same like for example, credit cards. Okay. So when you say credit card, if someone says, look, well, if I take a credit card out, I'm going to pay it before the month is up. So I'm not going to be in sood. And that's a fair point. And that's why the ulama sometimes give gunjaish that, khair, if you're going to do that. But when you actually sign up on the contract, you agree to the condition that if I don't pay upon, I will pay interest. So this is the condition, that's the issue. But because unfortunately of the fraud that we find on the internet, you find that there's ulama will give permissibility rather than using a debit card, because when you use your debit card, you lose the money. But when you use a credit card, the bank loses the money, and therefore the bank will trace it up as well. So anything where you agree, whatever way it's structured, if you agree to give interest, then that's where the issue comes. If you can avoid that, then there would be no harm in any type of mortgage or any type of arrangement. The key thing to bear in mind is that the vernacular language is important. Sometimes we call it Islamic mortgage, but it's not a mortgage. Okay. That's why we refer to it as a home purchase plan. The conventional is a mortgage. The house buying is not a mortgage. In the house buying, you are entering into a partnership. Okay. Diminishing musharaka sometimes it's called. You're entering into a partnership with another party, and now you're buying that property whilst paying rent. Whereas here, it's just a straightforward loan. So yes, the result is the same, but the process is important. Like the example I gave of the two burgers. One chicken burger and the other chicken burger looks exactly the same. So the end result is the same, but it's the process. A lecture I gave not so far from here, you can see a man and a woman and another man and a woman. So they both look the same, but they're living, in zina, and they're living with nikah. You can't see that, right? Because that looks like a man, he looks like a woman. That looks like a man, that looks like a woman. You say they're exactly the same. But you say, lekin, there's a nikah between these two. There's no nikah between these two. So it's the process which is different, not the end result. Because that's why people say, it's the same. You get, for Islamic mortgage and conventional mortgage is exactly the same. They loan you money, they loan you money. They call it interest, they call it profit. Same thing. No. This is a big difference. It's the process which is different. And that's why we need to understand that better. Once we understand the process, and we're cynical, unfortunately, as a community anyway, aren't we? We're always saying somebody's out to do me, they're trying to make money out of me and whatever, but it's not always the case.
Just to know, when you say like the banks, if someone can't pay the mortgage, they take the house back off the person. How does it work on the Islamic side? If a person is in partnership and he becomes disabled,
that will depend on the terms and conditions of the actual organization, but it is collateral, isn't it? It is collateral in this arrangement. So, it will always be deemed as collateral. So therefore that would be explored. But if again, you see, Sharia doesn't just necessarily apply to the process. It also applies to the kindness that this person should show, and the mercy that this person should show, and how this person is given plenty of opportunity to address that. All this risk assessment should have been done primarily. Sometimes also what you'll find is certain organizations will say that you do need to get some form of insurance to protect yourself in these circumstances. So you'd have to go by each provider, because each provider will have different conditions. Unless Molana, you want to add anything to that? Yeah? Okay.
What's the stance on financing and profiteering by endorsing vaccines which contain haram substances? Investing in haram substances which you then profiteer from. What's your stance on that?
Investing into haram substances?
Like haram vaccines. So, what's Mufti Saab's stance on financing and profiteering by endorsing vaccines which contain haram substances? So, like investing in, the pharmaceutical company which has haram vaccines.
Can you invest into something which has haram substances?
Yes.
Well, that's the answer's in the question. Right, so may Allah bless the brother. The answer's in the question, brother. I think we have, it might be, I don't know, I'm sort of reading between the lines, but you do have maybe people in, the Batley Dewsbury environment, which was post-COVID. There was a lot of excitement, I heard, that went on in Dewsbury and Batley. So, you had self-proclaimed scholars coming forward and saying, you can't vaccinate, it's haram, whatever. So vaccination has been a methodology that's been used for a long time. Many people will take their babies at the age of, 1 month or less than a month and have them vaccinated. Whenever the ulama give a fatwa, they're giving a fatwa based on a position in order to allow people to make that decision themselves. They're not endorsing or commanding it or making it praiseworthy. If only the people would listen to the ulama when they're saying something is praiseworthy, but they choose not to listen to that. But sometimes you get these anti-vaxxers, as they refer to, who get a little bit excited, mashallah. They learn 1 or 2 things on the internet and they suddenly think they become pharmaceutical experts. Just for the benefit of the brother and the audience as well, I have a qualification in chemistry. I spent 13 years in the chemical world, so I know how the chemical world works and how chemicals work. I'm not sure if that brother also has a similar background.
Fiat currency going to CBDC. Any truth to it, and should we be planning for this?
CBDC?
Yes.
I need to elaborate a little bit on what. Okay. Central bank digital currency. There's always been this talk about these, going to digital currencies and that eventually fiat money will disappear. Obviously, clearly money is disappearing. When I asked the question about, does anybody have any money in their wallet? Nobody had any money in their wallet. Nowadays, for me, it was very difficult to use my phone to pay for stuff. But my kids just naturally pick their phone up and zip things or whatever. I like to see money go out my wallet and money come into my wallet. But they're all right. So yeah, you can see it's changing. Cash is disappearing. I'm not a conspiracy theorist like the anti-vaxxer question. I don't sit and think that the world is out there to do me over and find some ways to control me. If the world or the people wanted to control me, there's so many ways they can control me. They wouldn't come blatantly at me to control me. So in this case, it seems to be a trend towards it. There does seem to be a trend towards it. Whether that is the plan or the aim, I don't know. Would it make sense to go towards that way? I guess so, because the powers that be would like to manage us a little bit better. So yeah, maybe. But I can't, it's speculative. So I can't really answer something which is speculative.
This is off the finance topic. Are you able to sell replica items, replica clothing, fake clothing, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think the answer is in the question. Something which is illegal, you cannot sell. Ji.
American Express card and Capital One card, when we spend, they give some kind of
yes.
bonus. Can we get?
So when it comes to using cards, like, credit cards or whatever, anything in which you're using something, and by using money, you get not only the money that you pay, but you get an extra in return. You have to be very careful with these things because these are what called benefits in kind. And anything which involves a transfer or exchange of money in which the other party has benefits in kind, then they have to be avoided. So because you can only get if it's a loan structure of what you've given. So because credit cards is usually it's a loan, isn't it? You use their money, and then you pay at the end of the month. And if they're giving you something extra by saying, okay, you spent £10,000 and you've given £10,000, but we also gave you, I don't know, an extra cake or something, whatever, then you've not really given 10,000 for 10,000. You've got bonus in return.
Some Masih advice in relation to masjids which hold thousands of pounds in conventional banks. What should they do? As a first question, and then the second one, just to wrap it up, is it halal or haram to eat ostrich?
Yes, that is an issue. Not the ostrich. That is an issue about the banking system and the money that we have in our banks. Because, I was happy to hear, mashallah, brother mentioning about what the masjid does. Unfortunately, a lot of masjids don't really do anything. Mashallah, they open their doors. People pray 5 times a day. Don't get me wrong. But it really should be the center of the community. It should be a community hub. It should be something where there's, you don't know when in somebody's heart Iman enters. And he comes to the masjid and he wants to, sit with somebody or connect with somebody. And, there will be, tens of thousands is nothing. If you go to the Charity Commission's website and those masjids which are registered charities, you can actually see what they have in their bank accounts. And there are more than tens of thousands. Some have 100,000s, some have millions. Right? So how can it be that there's poverty in the local area? How can it be that our youngsters are going to other places because they don't feel that they can come to a masjid and relax a little bit, or find a kind of youth facility where they can enjoy themselves and you know, play football, whatever. And they have to go to other areas, and we're set on millions. You know, sometimes as Muslims, we kind of laugh a little bit at, you know, the Vatican, because they've saved millions and millions and millions waiting for Isa alayhi salam to come. Because when Isa alayhi salam comes, they're going to give him all that money. If Isa alayhi salam comes, when he goes to the Vatican, Allahu alam if he goes there, but if he does go there, what's he going to say? You kept this money for me. You should have been giving this to the fuqara. You should have been giving this to the miskin. What are you keeping this money for me for? I don't need money. So similarly, of course, we have to contingency plan. Yani, you've got a masjid to run. You don't know something's going to happen. You know, a roof falls in, whatever you need, 10,000, 20, whatever you need. But the surplus, either we should be looking at establishing awqaf. So, for example, you know, say this masjid, they can buy 3 houses or buy 3 shops, and the rent from those shops are now bringing money into the masjid. Right? This is how masjids used to run back in the day. So you have awqaf. We don't do many at all as waqf. So that's an income generator. And now you don't need to always be asking chanda, because you're getting 3,000-4,000 pounds rent every month. And you've still got the asset. Okay. So that's an area, rather than just putting in a bank account. Because like I said to you, in putting in a bank account, the value depreciates. As we know now, you know, if you go get some sacks of cement, it's going to cost you a lot more getting those sacks of cement now than if you got it 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So therefore, by not allowing your money to be controlled and depreciated, you can then invest it in properties or whatever and have these awqaf. Okay, that's one solution. Well, that was a solution, but I said primary should be utilized. You know, help the community, engage with the community, because at the end of the day, you know, people need help, and how to solve that. And then alternative is obviously is the Islamic system. But the only problem that you have, you see, is like the brother asked the question, is once you've invested it, you do run the risk of losing the value of that. I appreciate when FSCS kicks in, then you'll still get your money back. But shar'an, it's a problem, because you shouldn't have got it back, because if you've invested it. But generally speaking, these organizations do give their returns. Obviously, I cannot speak on their behalf. You need to speak to these Islamic banks yourselves to get that. Ostrich, I've never come across that question, but from an asl perspective, it's a bird which doesn't eat. It's not a carnivore. So from an asl perspective, it should be, but I wouldn't put my hat on it. I'll give you the full answer, inshallah, when I check. But from an asl perspective, it should be permissible. But I don't know if there's any ostriches in Bali. You get ostriches around here? Okay. Sorry? Interest money, yeah. There's a whole thing about interest money. There's no nusus for what you do with interest money. There's no scriptural evidence for what you do with interest money, because you're not even allowed to engage in the transaction. As I said to the brother, you can't. This is just the ulama giving a solution. So what they used to say in days gone by is give it to the poor. Okay, give it to the fuqara, masakin, without the intention of reward, and just give that. And because to the Muslim it's filth. Obviously, when we give it to the fuqara, masakin, it's not filth, but to a Muslim it's filth. Later, ulama have said that, look, you can use it on public projects, but nothing which has any sort of spiritual, religious significance. So therefore, you know, building roads, some ulama have said, you know, building toilets around the masjid. Yeah, they've said it, masjid toilets, because it's public. Because remember the masjid, and this is what we need to understand, is the masjid itself is the boundary of the prayer area. So even though the masjid imara, the building, is where we take our shoes off from, but the actual masjid is which has been dedicated by the founders, which I believe would be as soon as we walk past that. It's only 3 safs. Alhamdulillah. So I prayed in the masjid. I was wondering why that was there. I saw that earlier and I thought, why is that there? Why isn't it there?
Downstairs,
So I read my dua over there, actually. We learned. Right, so there you go, mashallah, you're on it. So so when you do itikaf, what do? Do you just here?
Yeah.
And the poor chap can't go anywhere. Mashallah. Allah, it's proper, it's locked, isn't it? You got him boxed off. There's no escape. Oh, he's got a couple of windows. Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, okay, there you go. So this is the only part which is the masjid. So arguably speaking, you could use it in any other part for public services. So anything which is public service, so that's a later opinion. As I said, the first opinion was just to give to the poor masakin. But later have said, okay, what about this? So they said anything which is public services, so you can act on that fatwa, inshallah. Yeah. Should we finish it? Oh, sorry.
So you could use it for the masjid conservatory, you know where Shura is.
Yeah, as I said, it's a public place. Yeah, you can use it. You can't use it for the masjid. But as we've seen, the masjid is quite small. Yeah, the
So when you with all this kind of Sharia compliance area plan, like over here
yes,
and you mentioned they all have CS registered.
They have to be.
They're all registered. So when you put money into that, they clearly states on there that any potential loss will pay up to the amount you put in. Is that allowed?
No,
So I've just checked on.
Are you double sure about that?
QIB is raising this.
Yeah, because somebody else raised that question with me yesterday, the day before, about that very same point. And when I went on their website just yesterday, the day before, it doesn't say that. What it does say is that we expect you to get this profit. The only loss would come in is when the FSCS kicks in and they have to give you to make up. But I'm pretty sure we didn't have that. Yeah.
Because the thing was QIB.
Yeah, but I remember looking at that. We didn't have anything in there. And I said, I looked again. QIB was one, and the a Kuwaiti one I saw 3 days ago. And I looked at small print, and there was nothing in it, because they know they can't guarantee you. They have ulama on their board. They know they can't guarantee. They even say within their terms and conditions that if you do make a loss, then shar'an we can't give it to you. However, by FSCS regulations, we would have to give it to you. But they do tell you that shar'an, this is outside, this is impermissible. But because the state law, and this is why we have to understand as well, is there's regulatory law and there's Sharia law. And as much as, mashallah, we think Islam runs the world, right now it doesn't. Okay, the Western powers control things. So, and especially when you're in the UK as a 4%, 5% minority. And that's why when you get these kind of cynical people, and, I've come across them before, it's not really Islamic, give some credit. These brothers are actually trying to make a change. They're trying to bring it in. And even if it's only at 20% right now, it might be 50% in 5 years. It might be 80% in 10 years. It might be 100% in, 30 years. At least give some, credit to somebody to trying to make a difference. But as I said, we, as a community, unfortunately, we're very cynical, and, as we saw in some of the questions. We close?
So all these Islamic banks that you can find online, how do you know which ones are acceptable?
Yeah, that's the question. So what you have to do is you have to check on who their supervisory Sharia board is. If you don't know them, then obviously you can't trust them. So then you'd have to ring them and say, why don't you have some ulama on your supervisory Sharia board? Because we don't trust yours. And when the public makes the demand, then they will see, look, there's finance for them, isn't it? They'll realize that, okay, having shuyukh from Kuwait is not really going to push for people investing in the UK. So we have to get UK ulama on board. But if the public don't say it, they won't know. So that's the only way. Get in touch, say, unfortunately, I don't recognize any of them, or they don't follow a legal school, because they do sometimes have primarily Arab scholars who aren't of a particular school. So they do direct ijtihad from Quran and Hadith, which would be problematic for other things. So, but the public has to raise that awareness. They don't know.
The question is, if you want to set up a waqf, what are the Sharia considerations that you have to take into account?
Okay, so it's a little bit complicated, but there's the waqf would have to, because you have to find a financial structure for a waqf. Because it can't be structured as a charity, because the way it works is that you're giving something up. So that aspect is charity, but then you're a beneficiary as well. But in a charity, you give your money up and that's it, it's gone. But as a waqf, you're a beneficiary, because you can set a waqf for your family. Is that what you're doing? This guy's rich. You just get Jannah money off him. So, so you can set a waqf for your family. So you can say that my children, my grandchildren, my great-great-grandchildren can benefit from this thing. But after that, it will go to fi sabilillah. So you'd have to have solicitors that would structure it, because you have to take in the regulation of the UK into consideration, because a waqf is something that because we were talking a year or 2 years ago about this, and this is not something they've come across, because they find it very strange that on the one hand you're giving something up, but on the other hand you're also benefiting from it as well. And that's this concept that doesn't exist in Western finance. So yes, it's possible, but you need expensive lawyers as well. They charge like £500-600 an hour. Yeah.
What is waqf?
A waqf is basically the way most things were set up in say, for example, in the Ottoman period. The cemeteries were waqf, the hospitals were waqf. So basically rich people or people with some wealth would give up land or give up money. And usually it was land. It was things which you couldn't move. And they would say, I want to give this and make Allah the owner. So you make Allah the owner of it. Right? So now your children can't inherit that thing. So you say, I owned, a huge piece of land. Most in our, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, most things were set up by Awqaf. So they'd give up, somebody would give up a piece of his land to build a cemetery there. So what you do is it'll be for public service. So what you can do, for example, is you can convert your own house into a waqf, right? Which means now you've given that Allah owns it. You no longer own it. In that case, you can have beneficiaries, which could be that for the next 3 generations, that your children benefit. And after that, it goes into the path of Allah, which means then you get the ajr. Because you might be thinking, you know what? My kids might turn out all right. My grandkids, I don't know. My great grandkids, I'm not so sure. So I want to get some ajr, which is property I've bust a gut. I've earned lots of money. I've got lots of land. So for now, I don't want my children to suffer, my grandchildren to suffer. But after that, I'm not too bothered because I won't know them anyway. So then I wanted to go into the path of Allah or something. So that's how but it doesn't have to always be that your family benefits. It could be that you have other communities benefiting from it. So universities like Harvard University is a waqf. Obviously, Muslims did not set that up, just in case before we claim it. But it was set up, by rich people who gave up wealth or gave up land for it to be used for public service, public use. So it's very commendable. There's great ajr for it as well. But again, it's an area which we're not involved in because our financial understanding is so limited. So we don't understand this, how does that work or whatever, and benefit from that. So we went over a little bit more than half an hour. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.